Welcome to an episode of Titan PI TV, where we're looking at the inside workings of a live operational investigation agency, that being here, Titan in Derby. I am your host and Managing Director of Titan Private Investigation Limited, Simon Henson. If you prefer to listen to podcasts, you can download Titan PI TV podcast wherever you download your podcasts. So today, we're following on from the last few weeks. So we looked at the attributes and the selection process and the probationary period for a police surveillance operative. Then we looked at last week the Ripper authority because of a few comments which were made on the one before. So we thought we'd cover a little bit of Ripper, which we've done before. So please feel free to look at Ripper. This week we are looking at how you would spot, or certain things to look for, and how you would spot a surveillance team. Now, if it was a police surveillance team, I've already gone through the training. You're not going to spot them. It's going to be really difficult. But over the last 10 years since I've not been a police surveillance operative, I've noticed more and more police surveillance teams. You just come across them. So things that I have noticed are, there are 8 areas which I'm going to discuss. The first is earpieces. So 10 years ago, it was probably 11 years ago, I was looking at leaving the police and I went for a job interview at Sainsbury's. I think it was the 3rd interview I'd gone to for this role. And I was early, because I like to be early. So I went to McDonald's, went and got a coffee, was going through my notes on what I was going to say and my points. And whilst I was there in the queue, I noticed there was someone stood in front of me with a little earpiece inside their ear. And it wasn't the same colour as their skin, so it stood out a bit and it didn't look like a hearing aid. So I started to look around further and I saw others with this in, so I'd quite clearly stumbled across a police surveillance team. So one way you could get round this is if you go in close to monitor a subject, such as McDonald's, rather than get a compromise from a third party, which I clearly was because I wasn't under surveillance, then maybe it would be best to go deaf, which is we call in the industry, which is when you take your earpiece out. So you tell your team, I'm going in close, I'm going deaf. So they then know you're not on comms and you can't hear comms, and you just go to telephone. You just look like a normal member of the public. Another thing I noticed, which I would look for now, on that particular occasion, was surveillance operatives tend to put the PTT, the press to talk, so the bit which they depress to be able to then talk on their mic wherever that is hidden on them. They usually put that in their right pocket. So I started to look around, and the double confirmation for me was all these people with earpieces have their hands in the right pockets. Don't put your hand in your right pocket. Put your PTT in your left, or just put your hand over your pocket to press the PTT, so you haven't got your hand in your pocket, because all these people with earpieces had their hands in the right pocket, which for me was a massive trigger as a trained police surveillance operative. Another thing I would look for is shoes. So if I thought I was being followed, one thing that surveillance operatives never change are their shoes. So if you have triggered someone through their behaviour, or you're just suspicious of them and you think they may be following you, just have a look at their shoes, because the next sighting of them, they might have changed all of the clothing. They might be wearing a cap, they might be wearing a wig, but I would bet my bottom dollar they wouldn't change their shoes. So if they've got, police teams like to wear, or some do, camel coloured Timberland boots, which was a massive trigger for me. So if I saw that, that would be a big trigger, and it was one of my faux pas. I hated operatives wearing blue jeans and camel Timberland boots. But just look at the shoes. I would then look at the vehicles. So if there is a mobile surveillance behind me, I would suggest if it's a police team, none of those vehicles will be older than 3 years, unless through the POCA Act, which is when through criminal proceeds you take assets. So it might be that a criminal drug dealer has been caught and all his assets are through crime. They will all be confiscated and sold, and that would be part of the Proceeds of Crime Act. However, sometimes the surveillance team might be given a nice flashy Golf, an IR32 or whatever it's called. So that might not be 3 years old, that might be a bit older, but generally police vehicles are maintained by an outside independent company, and they won't be more than 3 years old. So I would be triggering how old the vehicle is and whether that's a police surveillance or not. I'd also look at number plates, especially if it's a police team, because police teams have sets of what they call ghost plates. Ghost plates are a number of registration numbers which come back to that vehicle and they're registered with DVLA. They won't come back to the police, but because they regularly change their number plates, because they may have been, their exposure might have gone up in a certain situation, they may then leave the surveillance, rather than change the car, just change the registration plate. So I'd be looking at loose registration plates, and also whether they've got the caps over the screws, because generally if you're changing your plates regularly, that cap will come off and work loose. Another trigger for me would be the police motorcyclist, or in any surveillance team, the motorcyclist. You don't generally get motorcyclists parked up in an urban area, just sat on their bike, potentially for hours, but just sat on their bike. You would generally be going out for a ride. You might go and get a brew or something. But even worse than that would be it being wet weather and the team being very kind and looking after their biker, and the surveillance team allowing the biker to park behind their car and the biker be in the car. Massive, massive trigger for me, and that would be a confirmation without a double confirmation that it is a surveillance team, whether that police or a civilian. So we've got two further points. Vehicle crew-ins. Police surveillance teams are generally double crewed. They do have single crewed, but in Civvy Street, very, very rare that you have double crewed cars. So if I saw double crewed cars, certainly two males, and the vehicle was less than 3 years old and the number plates looked a bit loose, that for me would tell me I'm either being followed by a civvy or police surveillance team. And my last point would be my home address. So if I was leaving my home address, I generally know the vehicles which are around those areas. So I would be looking for vehicles that look unfamiliar, vehicles that might have a warm engine because they've driven to that area. I'd be looking at vehicles that have got people sat in them, and it would be vehicles which are parked at the first point of deviation from my house. So for my house, it's a cul-de-sac controlled by a T-junction. So at the T-junction, I'd go left or right. So I would expect a surveillance operative to be parked, one on the left at the first point of deviation and one on the right. And that's where my awareness would be heightened, trying to spot whether it's a police or civvy surveillance team. So there are 8 points which, for me, would be a confirmation of a surveillance team, and some ideas there of how, if you are a surveillance team, how you can avoid that detection, such as taking your earpiece out or not putting your hand in your right pocket. Hope you enjoyed it. That's another episode of Titan PI TV. If you like what you've seen, give us a thumbs up. We always appreciate a thumbs up. But if you don't want to miss further episodes, then please subscribe to the channel. It's Titan PI TV, or you can download it on podcast wherever you download your podcasts, and it's Titan PI TV podcast. Till next time, and thank you for listening.